listeners, Harika here, and I'm super excited to welcome you to UppTalk. If you're ready to learn and get your hands work wonders in the world of information technology, then you're in the right place. When I say UppTalk, we are not just another edtech company. Consider we are your learning partner committed to unlocking your full potential. Whether you're stepping into the world of technology for the first time or looking to advance your career, we provide top-tier, hands-on courses to build up your career. Let's take our first step towards learning here and explore it.
Let's talk about assemblies. Basically, assembly is nothing but it's a unified environment for all the core functions that you will perform while using, like inside your work integration system. It can be like transformation of data, it can be handling of error, it can be sending a message to the integration event, it can be routing, it can be splitting data, it can be aggregating to different data, on and forth. Workday. What it does is, it provides a robust capability in the form of individual components that have different functions that can be connected together or like wired together to form the processing chain like the flow. It's like in terms of programming language. I would say it's like a flow of the program, right? From start to when you start, you do your processing, do data manipulation, do trigger validation, do like you use error handling, try and catch and all that stuff, and ultimately generate the ultimate output or the whatever desired results. This assembly is nothing, but it's like a drag and drop kind of a thing where I would say a 70% of your integration development thing will be like drag and drop, and the rest 30% is small bits and pieces of small. I won't say that, I won't tell it say coding, but like using variables, doing transformations, and on and forth. An assembly can have multiple components. On a broad level, let's take you a quick peek in the assembly. This is basically the Workday assembly, and inside that you have individual components. For example, this particular integration, like as I said, that this is a Workday here. When you click on this component, you can see here it's mentioned Workday in. Workday in is a transport component. It's an input transport component. Every integration starts from Workday in. If you want to create an integration, your first step is to add a Workday in component. How we can add it? That I will show you. Then, like this is a PIMM, which is a PT integration. It's a local out. Using it, we can route our processing to different sub-elements, sub-procedure. It's like in a program you call procedures, right? Same thing like, for example, using this, I am routing it to calling this particular section, which is nothing but this, and then again from here, I'm calling this. Each and every component has a specific task, and each and every component has different set of properties, different set of functionalities. Like this one is an async mediation component. Basically, what it does is using an async mediation, like its asynchronous mediation component. Using this, you can use the flow in the mediation component. In context, you can use the data that is flowing in, and you can do different kind of transformation or different kind of variable assignment. For example, inside this async mediation step, I have used different, like I am playing with the dates, formatting it using, determining the file name that I will use later while generating the output file. Similar to that, again, for example, this one is a Workday outrest component. This is normally. We'll see this being used when you are calling a report inside a studio, taking the data out of the report, consuming it, doing transformations. As you can see in the next step, I am here. I am doing some transformations on this report. The data that comes out of this report, the report, is this particular report, testable green job requisition. This report, I am calling it here, and then the data I am taking out of it, doing coding, accessibility transformation on this, and similarly moving it along using law, and then copying the data and keeping it in a variable. The async mediation. Basically, it's like in the runtime you are grabbing hold of taking control of the data and doing processing on it. Similarly, if I go here, like as I said, like transport is like Workday in, it can be local in HTTP out. An example of HTTP out would be, let me go in. Where was it? Just give me a second. Got it. For example, this one right here. What this integration is doing is basically talking to a third-party vendor using AP. As you can see here, this is an async mediation component. I am doing validations. I am writing stuff here. I am basically creating the headers for the authentication. Right? And then ultimately using this HTTP out. This is a transport component which transports the message or the payload that I want to transfer to the third party vendor. Similarly, if I go to the next step, the mediation component which I talked about, right? Async mediation, sync mediation. Asynchronous mediation is a one-step mediation. You take the data and you push it along. But sync mediation, it's like a synchronous mediation. For example, the Workday out rest that I mentioned, that I showed right where we are calling the data from the report and using it, messaging it, manipulating the data. That is a type of sync mediation, type of synchronous mediation component. Moving on, we have advanced assembly components like, as I said, routing. For example, routing is like based on certain conditions, right? For example, let's in a programmatic way, if this condition is true, then call this procedure, else call the different procedure. That is nothing but what the route component does. Splitter is like, let's say you are consuming a file, input file, or let's say report output inside your studio. And let's say that report has 100 rows of data and you want to take each row of the data and implement or apply your processing logic. The splitter. What it will do is split the entire 100 rows into 100 different parts and it will take one by one. It's like row by row processing. From people from the maybe database background or from programming background. It's like row by row, 100 rows. You take row number 1, work on it, pass it. Row number 2, work on it, pass it. Likewise. And aggregator is again another advanced component where you can aggregate the data from two different files. For example, let's say a possible use case can be, let's say you need to send a file to a particular vendor for which you need a report. You need to run a report in the tenant, consume that in Studio. But your output data cannot be pulled from one report. You need to have 2, 3 reports. Let's say you call those reports from your studio, pull the entire data, stack it one after another using an aggregator, and then use transformation to come up with whatever final file format or whatever data you want. That is a use case of an aggregator component. Other commonly used components are like put integration message. For example, put integration message is nothing but where you actually like, for example, any kind of validations. For example, let's say this is not a good example. For example, write this one. Here I'm storing the log file, final output log files, right? And I'm just sending using this put integration PIM, which is a local out component, which we are marking it as error. And the summary, the error message context, right? If there is an error, what is the error it will throw? You are actually sending the integration message which is in the runtime. Any validation or error message from the runtime to the integration event that when you open the tenant, look it up. Look at the integration event in the messages tab. You will find it. This was the error. This is a summary, or this may be an info, or this may be just a warning like that. Yes, Rodrigo, you had any question? No, sir. No problem. Again, there are other components called mediation, steps, right, which is transformation, validation, logging. Again, transformation, as I showed you in this particular place where I'm consuming the report data from here and I'm using XLT plus, which is SLT 3.0, and transforming the data to my desired output. That is one example. And validation, I think. Validation, I've used it here somewhere. Validation is like here the data is coming flowing in here, and in the evaluation I'm like here, and I'm actually pulling out the number of rows in the data set right in the XML message. It's like I'm taking the count of it and storing the count inside this property, and then I'm checking whether it's the property count is 0 or not. Then accordingly, I can create a failure message and pass it along. This is a type of validation and like a mediation step. That's on a high level. What are the different kind of individual components or building blocks of an integration on a high level? And you can see this is a palette. A palette is nothing, but it's the place where all the components are shown right. As you can see, there are different kinds of components, like as I said, the in transport, the out transport. Then this is sync mediation, sync mediations. Then you have the different like get integration systems, integration event, put integration message, put integration event, etc. This you get everything. Basically what you do is whenever you are, let's say you want to add, let me do. I think I created something called test. I have a question, Akash. Do you have an example of any of the logs that you have on any integration here available to see how you open it and check it? Well, there can be different ways of logging right. One is, for example, this is a simple log where you can do write at. This is the message that is going. For example, let me take you. For example, this particular case, right where here I am doing all the data manipulation and I'm basically writing it in the log. This kind of usage of the log component is, normally I use it for debugging purpose when I'm actually building or when I'm testing an integration. It's like printing the variables or printing the data that is flowing in right. And finally, you can use this particular log as well in terms of generating the final file. For example, in this particular integration, for example, this is a scenario where I am actually triggering a Workday web service using a Studio Write. As you see here, if there is any error, I'm sending it to this particular async mediation to trap the error. And I'm doing a count of the error here. This particular thing is called a cloud log. Using a cloud log is smarter in the sense that you can generate the cloud log in HTML, CSV, Excel, whatever. And you can provide the severity here itself. And you can do a number of things, like you can add extra columns and it ultimately comes up. The log comes up as in like, if you select HTML, it comes up in an HTML format, which is open, which can be open. Now an example, let me for one of my client. As you can see here, this is basically a cloud log output. How it looks like. If you mark it as critical, it will come up here. If you mark it as error, it will come up here. Warning info. And if you click on this all, it will give you everything. You can export this into a CSV as well. This is how a test cloud log looks like. This is the component. You can see my studio screen right. It is an HTML file that is saved on the local folder. Well, it will get saved in your integration event. When you look up, when you launch the integration, and you see that integration event in your tenant, you will see that whatever name you provide in the file, that you will find it. Correct. And the one I showed, that is how it looks like. And I prefer using cloud logs because it gives you a lot of flexibility instead of the normal logs. But again, that depends from developer to developer. Like you can use this particular log write. And you can create the errors. You can pass it like, for example, let's say, where did it go? For example, this one, where I am passing the starting from the ending from. These are basically nothing but the launch parameters which I'm consuming and storing it in these variables, and I am passing it into this log file just for my debug purposes. You can repurpose this. You can actually create a log file from here, and then you can use your stored procedure, not stored procedure, stored component rather. And finally, you can generate the output file output log. But I know I prefer the cloud log. But again, there's no hard and fast rule. It's just how each developer prefers. Any other questions on this? I'll proceed then. Now the component properties. Well, let's see. What is component properties? For example, a start here, I have these properties open. Let's say you open your studio and you don't see properties. Don't worry. You just need to right-click here and click on Show Properties View. It will come up here. Each component has different types of property, like options. For example, this is a workday in which is a starting point of every integration. It has. You can see the common where it's nothing, but whatever you name it here. And you have advanced. You have different launch parameters. You can have services. These services is nothing but like. Different kinds of services are there. Like the retrieval service, where you can retrieve document from outside, which is normally used for inbound integrations, right? A sequence generator service is a service which can be leveraged to create sequences in your file name. For example, let's say a possible use case would be if you have a file that is running multiple times in a week, right? You can, of course, you can do a date timestamp and that way you can track it. But let's say you want to also know that which is the first file of the day and which is the nth file of the day, fifth file. You can use this sequence generator service to create a sequence. I think a similar thing is also used in the when you set up core connectors or set up EBs. It's very similar to that. I'm not sure if anyone is aware of sequence generators in core connectors or EIBs. Does anyone know? What was the question about the core connectors? Again, the question is in core connectors as well as in EIBs. You can configure sequence generators right. Does anyone know this or any idea on the sequence generator? How does it look? How does it function? This is kind of new to us. That's when you have the job posting on a website. Like, for example, right on an external website connected with Workday. Not really. As I said, let's say you want to send a file to a third-party vendor or an external system multiple times in a day, right? In that case, if you want to have a sequence associated in your file name, like sequence 1001, 1002, 1003, like that, you can append that in your file name. That is being done by the sequence generator service. And this is not only specific to Studio, that is also applicable for core connectors or EIBs as well. Anywhere where you are actually generating a file which has to have a file name, you can have that sequence generator service. Would you use the sequence generator service too? Like if you were trying to create like an EIB output file and like for each record in that file you need like a new one of number. Well, for each. Is that accessible to the difference? Then you have to, if you want to have, let's say you have 5,000 rows and you want to have a sequence number for each row. In that case, that can be done via accessibility. You cannot do it by a sequence generator. Sequence generator is only for the file names. If you want to add a sequence to the file name, within the accessibility component, there's already different capability directly in there. What accessibility capability is for? It basically deals with the data, let's say, in this case, the data of the file write. If let's say I'm giving a very simple example, let's say gender write. Male, female, unknown, or whatever. For male, you want to send M for female. You want to send F for unknown. You want to send U. That you can handle in accessibility or more complex stuff, right? For example, let's say you have a parameter you have a property right. Or let's say variable in your Studio program. You want to use that variable, pass it in the accessibility, pass it in the and use that variable for transforming the XML data. What you can do is, inside your accessibility, you can create parameters and pass that variable value to the parameter and use that in data processing and all. Accessibility capabilities are mostly from the data side of it. Does that answer your question, John? Yes, it does. Thank you. You're welcome. Other services mostly, for example, we said why it's not. If you hover on these icons, right, each icon is a different, like retrieval service. I talked about delivery services there. And report service, which is very commonly used when you are trying to pull a report called a RAS report inside a studio, then you need to create the report service. For example, this one. This is basically a report service which I created to pull the report inside the studio. Similarly, other components will have different types of properties, right? For example, let's say this. This is an HTTP out component, right? Here you will have like the endpoint where you can provide the endpoints. You can use the execute when it is nothing but a condition, right? When it will be used. Let's say there's a requirement where you have to call this, you have to post to this particular third party AP. For a certain scenario, for a certain. If there is a certain logic that becomes true, that logic can put it here on a force. Like for async mediation, it has different components. For example, I'll show you one for a splitter. Splitter, right? Within the splitter, you have the strategy of the splitter. On what strategy you are trying to split it. For this particular case, we are splitting the XML data using an XML stream splitter. It's nothing but based on the root node and the child. Report here, in this case the report data node, is nothing but the root and report entries, each individual row. That means this splitter will divide, let's say, 1,000 rows one by one. Those are basically on a like what are the different properties. What you see in the properties view, and the property view changes with each component. Then we have the Workday in transport. As I already mentioned that Workday in transport, it has different parameters, different properties like the common, advanced, the launch parameter and the services. We talk about different service reports, service delivery, service retrieval service. Then comes the wiring components. Wiring components are nothing but these arrows you can see here. You can make it straight, you can make it curved. Every component you have to connect it by this. How you do? This is nothing but like this you take it. This is an outgoing connection. You pull it, you keep it here. Over. And in some cases, right. Not this one. For example, for this case, right for splitter, for not splitter, for routing strategies, right. For if this condition is true, it will route to this particular place. If this is true, that also, I don't have an example of route. But again, ultimately the thing is the same. These arrows, you have to just pull from here and drag it to whichever component you want to take it to. Those are the wiring components. Is everything kind of like synchronous out of the box? Unless you use like one of those async components. Is it like each one of those components finishes doing its work before it then obviously uses the arrow to know what component needs to kick off and run next? Well, yes, in the sense that the data flows in this way. For example, I'm starting here, right? This is my workday in. After workday. In what I'm doing a message. Simple put integration message. It's nothing but just an info that's saying integration has started. Then I'm doing a call report. This call report. Actually, it's if you right click on this, click on declaration in workspace, it brings you here. Report call. That means from after this PMM start, the control goes to report call. The report is being called. And then finally, then the transfer, then the control goes back here. And then I'm doing a web service prep. I'm calling this particular component, which is again declared here. Right? Yes, it flows linearly in the sense it checks on how the wiring components. For example, if I change this wiring component from here, if I try to send it to this or some other, like here, that means pull it. Let's do this. That means from the flow of the program or flow of the integration. It will go from this and directly it will go to splitter. It will not go into the validation. As in that I have created. This wiring components is very important. This actually makes you determines your flow of the integration. That answers my question. Like that web service prep, it is defined at the very top. And this is kind of like the exploded view of everything that's in the web service prep. How did you get from up there? There you could begin designing the web service prep flow. Got it. Got it. This integration flow. It's forget about it. You can start it from here. Like the program starts from start here, then goes to PM start, then goes to call report. What I have done is to make the integration, make the assembly look good, and make the assembly readable. Like what we call to make the code readable enough. What I have done is, instead of this, I could have directly moved this particular section directly. I could have put it here. But what it would have done is the entire flow would have looked very, very clumsy. Very messy. Very. It's just more for readability. Exactly. It's all cosmetic. Right. The way I approach the integration is, I kind of understand, think in my brain that what all components I need. And I first create these blocks. These are all swim lanes. I'll talk about swim lanes later. I create in my mind the blocks that I might do to my work is to do a report call. I'll call the report from the and consume it. Then what I'll do is I will prepare the data, do manipulation and whatever to make it ready to call the web service. This is my web service prep. From there, I am actually doing the trigger of the web service. I'm done with the trigger. Now I have to do the logs. I have to log the data, which calls went to success, which calls went to errors. And I will do the logs here. Then once it is done, then final, to give it a finishing touch, I will create this. I will create a local out. This is called a local out component. Basically it out. Local out means it's throwing out the flow of the program. And here what I'm doing is in this local out. In the endpoint of this local out, I am mentioning this. This is a local in. That is what creates the connection The flow that from it's like how does it's like a calling different modules in a program flow. It's like a function call. Calling a function, right? That way we can do it. That was weird syntax though. Like, how did can you click on that? We can see the local int property again. Just the local int. This local int is actually why I have put it here. Because I am using the local out here. What I could have done is forget this. Look at this. I could have done this. You're getting my point, John. I, th- I think it'll be more clear as we go on. Right. It's like doing this. It's a simple like I start here. I do async meditation here. Then I put like, let's say I want to call a report. Let's expand it. Or do a workday out rest. I call the report. Then let's say I want to split the data of the report. I use a splitter. Well, I got everything splitted row by row processing. Then let's say I need to again work on the individual rows. I have to pull another async meditation. I'll keep it here. Here and inside the meditation, let's say I do eval doing properties variables. Whatever x, y, z with the logic of whatever, then I do that, then I have to, I need to do some XSLT as well. I'll put an XLT code here. And it becomes more and more like this. This pipe keeps on growing and growing just to make it more readable. I use the combination of local in, local out as you saw here. You divide it like blocks instead of having a bunch of arrows. Otherwise, it's kind of a big integration with many things. If I didn't do this function call kind of a thing, I would have been gone from this to then this to this. It will be like a big, a train chain kind of a thing. Well, I would say many developers like to do it in that way, but it becomes very hard to read. And the best part about this is when you are, let's say, debugging this integration, right? You just need to see this one where it's called report. You just right click on it. Click on declaration workspace. It will take you here. Where is store success log? It will take you here. Likewise, it's pretty very simple and very easy. Makes sense. We talked about the wiring components, fine. Then launching an integration in Workday Studio. Well, there are multiple ways you can launch it. Right. For example, this particular. I would just. Now screen looks good. Let's say you want to just close it. I don't want to inadvertently save it. Let's see. Let's take this. You want to run the integration. How you can run it? You go here. What is it? Every. I think Workday should have given a search button somewhere here. It's difficult to find. As I think I talked about it yesterday, what you can do is you can right click. You can click on this deploy to Workday, or you can just click on this. You can see this button here. Is it visible to these? If you hover on this, it will show deploy to Workday. You can go from here or here. If you go to deploy to Workday, whatever the Workday environments you are plugged in, you can see that in your Cloud Explorer, which is here. Just follow my cursor here. Click on this. You click on Show. You can or may not click it, but this is definitely important. Include source code in your deployed cloud. Click on Next. And just click on Finish. It will get copied to the tenant. And then you go into the tenant search integration, go to the related action and launch it. That is one way which I prefer normally. Also, the other way is once you deploy it, instead of going into the tenant and running it, what you can do is in your Cloud Explorer, wherever your tenant is, you just click on this small left icon. It will give you all the studio integrations that are deployed in your tenant. You identify your integration. In this case, I'll take the green one. Click on this and you see this small green tick here. Can you see that? Expand this. You will have a start here. When I mentioned that every integration starts with a Workday in is basically it's a starting point of your integration. Here you can see the start here. Here you can see all the different services like this, a sequence generator service, the report service, and what of the launch parameter. You just need to click on the start here, do a right click, and you can see this launch integration. If you click this, it's running in the tenant, but you don't have to go in and see the integration run in the tenant. You can see that if you are not looking at it, it will trigger the integration, which I don't want. If you click on this launch integration, you see this process monitor here. You will see this an entry and this process monitor, and you can see whether the status is completed or completed with warnings errors. This is a way you can run and see the integration from the studio itself. It's not that it's running inside the studio. It's actually running in the tenant, but you can see it here. But I don't use it, to be honest, because I have my tenant access. I can go in and open the tenant, and in the tenant it's a UI right. It's very user friendly. You can download the logs, look at the messages. It looks better. But well, Workday provides this option as well. We talked about the process monitor, and I think we talked about the port integration message as well. It's nothing but sends the integration message to the Workday, means the integration event. And we also briefly talked about the log step. This is one activity we will revisit it. It's nothing but a very simple integration where you will create an assembly and basically an integration from scratch where you have to add a swim lane, a Workday transport asymptomatic, and you can use a log step and ultimately attach it to the not attach, send user port integration message to send it to the integration event. It's like kind of a hands-on on whatever we discussed, but we'll revisit. Yesterday's couple of hands-on are also pending. We will revisit it tomorrow. Well, moving on is the mediation context. Before going into the mediation context, always remember this thing that inside the studio, everything that when the message flows, It's in the XML format. You may ask, what does it mean by when the message flows? It means, let's take this scenario. And basically what I'm doing is I am using some certain taking over. This is the Properties tab. There is a disintegration. Actually takes in as input parameters, launch parameters or launch attributes, a bunch load of data. All of them. I'm putting it here as I'm grabbing it all this. And then I'm calling this particular section here, which basically it is nothing, but I'm pulling a report and inside the report I'm passing this run parameter. When the report returns the data, right, it is basically returning the data in XML format and this XML message. Let's say this report generates 2 rows of data. 2 employees are coming up in the report output. It will be an XML and that will flow inside this. During runtime, that message will flow in here. That means the report output. Here I am taking the count of the number of rows that is in the report. That XML, let's say containing 2 data, 2 employee data, the report count will be 2. Then, based on that, I am creating a validation whether the count is 0 or more. Then I'm sending it to splitter to split it row by row. And then finally, I'm calling the AP, like web service. Once I call the web service, the mediation context changes. A right step. Here I'm actually preparing the web service and inside the web service and basically passing the employee ID, all the parameters and all other stuffs. Right. The right step basically changes the context of the message flow. Now I don't have the XML output of the report flowing. Now using the right, I have altered that. And now the message that is flowing is this particular XM and which I am using an accessibility transformation. I am working on that XML and doing other manipulation and all. Once I do this. Basically this is nothing, but I am generating this using this XML code. I am generating a new set of message, new component of message. Once this accessibility plus is being used like in the runtime. Now the message that is flowing is nothing but whatever comes out of the accessibility output, accessibility plus components output. Having said my point is going back to the point here. Mediation context. Conceptually it's nothing, but during runtime of the integration, it's like assemblies, like it provides a holder object for like holder object is passing. Mediation is one such holder object. Right. Using that holder object, you can do web service calls, transformation or whatever. The holder object for the information is basically called the mediation context. All assemblies involves either reading from or writing to the mediation context. What I'm saying is that whenever, like as I said, I'm either inside the flow of this program or of this integration. The output of the Workday output of this report, it was flowing. I used it up to here. And then using this right step, I created a new set of new message XML message that is again flowing forward. Are you getting my point? Any questions here? But is your point that you basically ran a report or an AP? I call get workers right. It output in XML format. You then transform that output into basically you added value to it. Right? And then is your point that it really just exists in memory. It exists in the runtime. To correct you, John, it's like I ran the report to get the terminated employees. How many employees got dumped? Right. The report is giving me employee A got dumped, employee B got dumped, and its associated attributes. The name is first name, last name, whatever. Now I'm using that. I used it. Use the report output. For example, here I'm passing it as the first name, then the last name, then the employee ID, the termination data, and all. And then I'm manipulating the date, formatting it, whatever. Then using these variables, right? These properties. I'm calling the get workers AP. I now using this XML where I'm passing the employee ID. I'm getting the terminated employee ID by calling the report, taking it in, using it in the right step to call the get workers web service. Because I need information of the terminated employees from the get workers web service. My point here is that always keep in mind that when you are running a studio, integration message always flows as an XML. That is the format in which the message is flowing. You want to change that message. Change the data to a different format. We have components. You want to change it from XML to CSV. We can do that inside a Studio XML to JSON to CSV, any form of transformation, we can do that. That was my point on the mediation context part. And in that context, we have MVEL. If anyone has Java background, they will. It will be slightly familiar. MVEL is basically a powerful language for Java-based application. It's a very robust language where you can write small variable assignments to full all-out scripts. And inside the studio, MVEL has different. It supports inside the studio. The assembly runtime basically supports these kind of properties of the MVEL. Like for example, MVEL parts. Parts you can use. The thing that I mentioned, the mediation message right. The XML that is flowing. You can use parts to determine the root part of the message right, like parts0.text. This particular thing, parts0.text will give you the root part of the message. Props. I showed you the props where you can add values to it. It works like a property. Inside, for example, the employee ID, I showed you right. I was storing the first name, the last name inside the properties which I am using it later in my web service call. Variables is like it accesses the variables inside the mediation context. Like for example, like was this particular syntax right? Was test.text will get the text of the variable called test. If you have a variable which is called test, it will give the text output of the variable. Similarly, LP is nothing but the launch parameter, which is again very frequently used in Studio, where you have launch parameters in Studio, and you want to consume that launch parameter and use it elsewhere. For example, an example would be this particular integration, where I'm running the integration with a date parameter. The state parameter is nothing, but I want to know that how many employees got terminated on or after this particular date. This particular syntax, a.getDate is basically gives you that data. I'm using this piece of code to get the launch parameters stored in this particular property, which again I am using here in the report call where I'm running the report. Based on that particular date, which I'm getting in the integration a cost. Does that prompt the user for the date? Does that trigger like the user input? Like if somebody was running this integration through Workday directly. Yes. The launch parameter means that whoever is running the integration or scheduling the integration, that person has to provide the date for the launch parameter. The thing that I showed you is nothing, but I am taking the date which is being used while for running the integration. I am taking that date and passing it as a inside the report to tell the report that the report should run as of this date. Got. We've also seen where you can basically put like configuration properties like in Workday and pull those. Yes, actually we're talking about attributes, right? Attribute. Is that the same area of code? Attributes means anything. For example, in this particular scenario, integration, right? This particular client had different organization specific rules, right? I could have hard coded it inside the studio program. Instead, I configured the integration in such a way that while creating the integration system, right? You can configure that which all organization role you want the integration to process, which are practice areas, which are communities, which are all professional roles. Using this attribute, using this in instance, which is nothing but integration system dot get attribute reference data. I am pulling those attributes. I think John is here. What I'm doing is I am pulling those attribute data inside Workday and storing it into these particular properties. Why I'm doing this? Because if I hard code it tomorrow or a couple of years later, we might have a new organization role or a new practice area come up. Right. I don't want to touch my integration. I would just configure it in the integration attribute in the UI, the front end, like SFP credentials, maybe other login credentials to other like third-party areas or systems. Those would be all things you would do this way. You don't have to hard code those credentials. Absolutely. Absolutely. For example, this particular scenario, right? This integration where I was actually integrating with a third-party tool where you see here API authentication attributes. This third-party integration had the API client, ID the client secret, the token endpoint, all the endpoint details. What I did was I configured it in the integration level. The good thing about this is when I configure it in the integration attributes, it's actually secured by Workday security, right? If I am like I don't have to worry about the security. Security because the client ID and client secrets are highly sensitive stuff, right? I use this service, if you remember, service report, service sequence generator service. This is something called attribute service, attribute map service. In Studio, when you create the attribute map service means either it takes care of both the integration maps as well as attributes. Attribute service. You will configure it here when you deploy the Studio integration in your tenant. Your tenant will throw you a warning that, hey, you have attribute service created, but you haven't set up any attributes. You go to the related actions of the studio of the integration system. You click Go to the Configure Attributes, and then you configure whatever the client. ID is client secret. You don't have to hard code it in the system. So, hard code it in the integration. Tomorrow, if the third party changes the client ID or client secret, you just need to change it in the integration system, not in the code. Gotcha. Thank you. Welcome. Any doubts as of now? Any question? No question. I think maybe Tim, you have questions. Not at this moment. On this, maybe when we practice a little bit, we'll have more. I know. I know. I know it's some you might feel like that you know kind of a lot of information overload. But don't worry when we will do the activities. I will do it with you and we all will do it together. It will be. You will now. Then you will realize this is what we discuss and this is what it is. Then things will get clearer. I'll move on to the next topic. Just give me a second. Web services. Anyone has any background on the Workdays? What they provided public services like the API. The report as a service, it is one, right? Report as a service is one. It's like you create a report, enable it as web service, and use it as a REST operation. But the like get workers. Right. It's a Workday's public web service. Like the endpoints for their API, right? Rodrigo, do you want to ask a cost? I know it's a little bit not necessarily related to Workday Studio, but it could be Workday Studio. Workday Studio can call those APIs. Correct. Uh, yes, it can. Rodrigo, do you want to ask the question about the access tokens? I mean, I'm not sure if we can, if it's going to be part of this, but I've been working with this. But you mean, John, the one that we were trying to get, or like maybe a cost as like a best practice for us as far as like how we should authenticate to those APIs. Gosh, we're using an access token now. We didn't know if there was a better way to be using things because the access tokens seem to expire quite often. How do you typically interact with the APIs? I guess as far as authentication to them. Well, there will be. Depends on what kind of secure, like authentication protocol they're using. For example, the example like the one that we talked about just now with the client ID and secret, which you can see on your screen. They had a client ID secret user password, kind of a basic authentication. We did that. It never expires. Right. There are other places where we are authenticating with the, like for example, I'll give an example of DocuSign, right? With DocuSign, I know Workday provides the connector, but for this particular client, there was different requirements for which we had to create a custom integration altogether where we were actually interacting with DocuSign, authenticating with using JBooty token. Basically, what you can do is you have to make use of this. In this scenario, we're trying to call the Workday REST API. And I think like part of the header requires like an access token to be passed in. We're called like the REST. I'm assuming it's probably the same authentication for like the Workday SOAP APIs too. But like how do you typically interact with those APIs? Like do you have to do it as a certain person? Like if you wanted to approve a business process, do you do that like as a super user? Or do you have to do it as the specific user that the current like step of the business process is assigned to? And you use the access token, or do you use like a client ID in secret like you just showed? Well, that is what I'm saying. It depends on what exactly the security protocol or authentication protocol your endpoint, your third party vendor is comfortable with. I have done with using client ID client secret. I have done with JWT token. It depends. It's not a one size fits all. There are multiple ways, but let's say, for example, you have or you want to just interact between systems and not use. You know user consent. I know there is, for example, a way you can register an API integration client instead of just using the client secret token. But when you do that, I think you need to attach it to kind of like a Workday account that has permission with all those. Right. When you create the integration, you can assign that integration to ISU, right? ISU is integration system user. Integration system user. And you tell using that integration system user, you can do the authentication. That way, you don't have to depend on a particular like Workday user for that matter. And you give all the requirement to like all the security privileges to the ISU, and the ISU can take care of it. And just to make sure there's like the access token will always expire every like X amount of hours. There is no way you can just generate one access token and then it's going to last for like 30 days or just like forever. Is going to be like your access key or something like that. What you can do is you can like whenever you are doing the call, right? The API call with the third party. You generate token at that point of time. It will be similar to what you can see in the screen. The same thing I have done. I'm passing this JWT token right to the DocuSign. What they are doing is, I'll show you passing this. You're saying to generate a new token every runtime or every time that they run the call, right? Exactly. For example, here, they were, what I'm doing is I have a JWT token. I have created this JWT token using, you can create it with any third party tool. You just need to provide the ID, the credentials, right? The user ID and all. You create it. There will be Unix Podge time. You can have it available for, let's say, 1 year, 2 or 5 years, whatever. What I'm doing, I'm passing the JWT token and using the JWT token, I'm setting the headers here. As you can see here, that I'm getting this. Here, what I'm doing is I'm sending the JWT to this particular endpoint. In response, I'm getting a JSON output. That JSON, I'm converting it to XML. I'm storing from that XML. I am pulling the access token because that JSON had not only the access token, other information as well. I'm getting the XML message like this. From that, I'm passing that XML using XPath. I'm taking this access underscore token, storing it here. And then in the set headers, I am passing that access token that I am getting. And finally passing it to the endpoint, from where the endpoint is getting this particular access token which I passed in the header. They realize that this is a legitimate access token, authentication established, and now they will provide me whatever data I need. Basically, here I'm pulling the envelopes of the signature, signed documents. That way you can try and use it. Is that? Shall we proceed, Rodrigo? Go ahead. Got it. Workday Web Services. Can you see the Workday community website? This, I don't know whether you have this or not. I think you all of you have Workday community access. We do. Then you can just search it in the community. You will get this. This particular document, it has all the module specific, all the web services that are available. If you, let's say, you want to go to the operations directory. Let's say you want to explore this at update organization. You want to create organizations in your form. You want to update, you want to change the data of the organization, and also Workday provides a particular web service operations for this. This document will give you all the details that is there. It will give you sample request. Request means the request that you will send to Workday. Basically, it's what which you will hit Workday with for the response. The response is a result. It's like request is like the select query, and the response is the output of the query. If you go here, it's like a XML request, which shows that which all things are optional, which all things are necessary, all that stuff. How to read it? For each block, they have provided all the details, all the validations that are necessary. For example, organization data. This cardinality one means it is required and there can be only one block of this organization data. Right. Here, like inside the organization data XML block, you have the effective date, the organization reference ID, on and forth. Here you can see the cardinality is 0. One means it is not a required field. That means in this cardinality column, the first value is whether denotes whether it is required or not. 0 means it's not a required field. 1 means it's required. If you go on the top, this was 1. 1 means you need to have at least 1. You need to have in your XML request at least one organization data block. Otherwise, how will work to understand what are you trying to update or what are you trying to add, right? And this the second number in this cardinality is whether it can have multiple entries or whether it can have one entry. If this would have been a star, that means you can have multiple entries. For example, address. I can have a home address or phone number. I can have a personal cell phone, multiple phone numbers, right? Or multiple home address, work address or work email, personal email like that. I just wanted to show you this just to understand how to read through this document and how to understand the cardinality of it. Because when you will be in a real-time scenario, when you will be needing to use the Workday Web Services, this is the document you have to go to. This is a go-to document, basically. Coming back to the slides. Workday Public Web Service is basically SWAP APIs which allows you to access Workday and add, update, delete data in Workday. Like in database terms, we used to do insert, update, deletes. Same thing. Workday provides these web services that you can alter or play with the data whatever you want to do, mass uploads, mass changes, mass resends, mass corrections. There are different web services for these. These services are available to the integration tools like inside the studio. You can call these web services and can work with it. These web services are covered by Workday Security. A web service operation. Any web service operation is basically a BP or a task. As you might know that every BP is encapsulated by Workday Security. It is driven by domains and security groups rules. Same goes for task as well. If you do not have access to, let's say, add an organization in Workday, you will not have access to add update organization web service as well. You have to if you just a second. What you can do is there's a report called Public Web Services, which will show you actually all the details of the public web services that are available and what and with the. If you go to related actions of the public web service, you can see what are the different security groups that are associated to web service. For example, in your real-time scenario, let's say you are trying to use get workers right. Or let's say get candidates, and you are not able to. You're running it in a studio integration, but you are getting errors saying that insufficient privileges. Then definitely you need access for it. How do you know what get candidates needs? What access? This is the report that you go to. There is public web services related actions, security view web service operation security group. Then granting security. Again, there's a report called View Security for Securable Item. We call it View Sec for Sec. That will give you options where you can look up a domain item to see which security groups you have. And most firms, most organizations, how they are structured is like there will be a security expert, a Workday security expert. Normally, people will reach out to that security expert and they will grant you the required privileges. Fourth most important thing is the Studio Web Service Tester. Let's say you want to develop or you are doing a POC on how to create an integration. Right. And you want to see that whether you have a particular web service in mind. Let's talk about organization or start performance review. You are doing a POC. Will you create the entire studio integration and call the web service and do a POC? In the studio tool, there is a thing called web service tester which you can use. And hit the Workday database or not the database to be technically true. Hit Workday and then you can see whether the data is getting updated or data is getting added. And you can finalize your POC on that. how you can do that. I'll take you back to the studio screen. Let's remove it for now. This is a Schema Explorer. If you remember, yesterday we talked about Schema Explorer. If you don't see the schema, explore again Preferences, Perspective and go to Other and you can see it in the Schema Explorer. You can see this small arrow drop down. Is it visible? We see it. If you go here, you have two options, Add Workday Web Services. If you click this gives you all the Let's take an example of Well, let's take an example of absence management. Right. You see, it will appear here. It will not give you the latest version. If you want to have the latest version of it, then click here. Go to Add Latest Web Services. Click on the list. If you see here, it gives you enter time off, adjust time off, and everything. If you right click on, let's say enter time off, right click on this. Click on this Open SOAP Property Request in Web Service Tester. Click on this. A window opens up called WSD star where you will see the entire XML request here. Let's say you are doing a policy and you put contingent worker ID blah blah blah. And all the details, all the required fields. From where will you get to know the required fields? Is this document, right? Here if you go up, absence management and the time off, you go in here, enter time off data. You see worker object. Worker object. What all types can it have? No contingent worker ID. Well, I can have contingent worker ID fine, or we can have employee ID as well. That means we can use employee ID here as well. Employee ID, and you put the employee ID here and you go through it. Go through and see what all X, M, L blocks you need and what all you don't need based on the cardinality options here. Then you click on this small button, green button called Send Request. Once you hit it, it will hit your tenant. Which tenant? Which is which you are connected to. From where do you know which you are connected to? Is your Cloud Explorer. The tenant where you are connected to will be highlighted here. Like I'm connected to gPreview. It will be highlighted here with this blue icon is highlighted. When I hit it, it will query Workday. Workday is particular tenant you are connected to and it will return the data. Enter time off is a put request. It will enter the time off details. If you would have picked up get workers and pass the worker employee ID, let's say employee ID of Akash, right? 1, 2. It will give you all the details about Akash, whatever is there in the tenant. That is how the web service tester actually works. Again, we have an activity on this as well, which we will take care later in the course. But that is what web service tester is all about. And if you want to take a peek at how the web services are pulled inside a studio, then I will show you this particular example. Basically here I am actually triggering the web service. As you can see here, this is nothing but I am initiating a performance review for an employee, right? This code is nothing but the start. Performance review web service request. I copied and pasted in the right. Using the right component inside an asymptomatic and past pass. The employee ID, the template ID, which review template the employees are supposed to use. The start date of the review employee. The end date of the employee review. And finally, I am wrapping it in this using wrap soap, and finally calling the Workday out soap component, passing the version here and getting the output. If it's a success, I'm calling it as a success and writing in the log that the web service, the performance review, has been initiated for this employee is a success. Or if I get an error, I'll pass it in the error here. This is how you call a web service from Studio. Don't worry about it. We have activity and some activity for this as well, which we will do later. Please do like, share and subscribe to our channel. For more information, contact us sales@upptalk.com.